The stars outside the viewport looked like scattered diamonds on black silk. Ethan Mercer stood in front of the thick glass and stared at them the way a man stares at the ocean when he has nowhere else to go. He had been standing in this same corridor, on this same station, for 11 months. Nobody had spoken to him today. Nobody had spoken to him yesterday either. The Velenthari Royal Station was called the Throne of Stars. It floated in the deep black between two spiral arms of the galaxy, a massive structure of crystal and light that stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. It was home to the most powerful alien species in the known universe. The Velenthari were tall, almost 8 feet, with skin that looked like living glass. Light moved through their bodies in slow, beautiful waves. When they spoke, their voices sounded like wind chimes made of silver. They were ancient, they were proud, and they looked at Ethan Mercer the way a person looks at a fly sitting on their dinner plate. Ethan was human, that was his problem. Humanity had been discovered by the Galactic Dominion only 40 years ago. In the grand scale of things, humans were bobbies. They were small, soft, and fragile. They lived short lives, they broke easily. The Dominion had allowed Earth to join as a minor member the way a wealthy club might allow a stray dog to sleep near the back door. Humans were given small jobs, translation work, cleaning, carrying things, nothing important, nothing that mattered. Ethan had been a Marine back on Earth, Sergeant First Class, 2 combat tour. He had scars on his body that told stories he never talked about. When Earth's government needed to send warm bodies as part of a diplomatic exchange with the Velenthari sovereignty, Ethan's name ended up on the list. Not because he was special, because he was available. His assignment was simple: guard a service corridor on the lower levels of the station, a corridor that led to storage rooms and maintenance shafts, a corridor that no one important ever used. It was not a real job. It was a way for the Velenthari to say they accepted the human offering without actually having to look at him. So Ethan stood, he watched, he waited, and because he was a Marine and Marines never stop paying attention, he learned. He learned the Velenthari language in 4 months, not from classes or programs, from listening. He stood in his corridor and listened to every conversation that passed by. The Velenthari did not bother to lower their voices around him. Why would they? He was furniture to them, a piece of equipment with legs. He learned their customs. The Velenthari believed in one thing above all else. They called it the doctrine of the sacred self. Every Velenthari was taught from birth that their body was the most important thing in the universe. Not in a selfish way exactly. It was more like a religion. The body was the vessel of the soul. To damage your own body for any reason was considered a sin. To damage it for the sake of another person was unthinkable. It simply did not happen. A Velenthari soldier would fight to protect the empire, yes, but they would never deliberately put themselves in the path of danger to save a single individual. The individual was responsible for their own vessel. That was the law. That was the way. Ethan thought about this a lot during his long, quiet shifts. On Earth, a firefighter runs into a burning building to save a stranger. A mother throws herself over her child during an earthquake. A soldier jumps on a grenade to save his squad. These things were not unusual to humans. They were celebrated. They were expected. Here, among the Velenthari, such acts would be considered insanity. Ethan kept this thought to himself. He kept most things to himself. It was during his 6th month on the station that he first saw the princess. Her name was Valeth. She was the only daughter of Queen Seraphale, the ruler of the entire Velenthari sovereignty. By Velenthari standards, Valeth was young, a teenager more or less. She was smaller than the adults, only about 6 feet tall, and her crystalline skin had a pale blue shimmer that the older Velenthari did not have. She moved quickly, quietly, and with a kind of nervous energy that reminded Ethan of the young recruits he used to train back on Earth. The first time he saw her, she was sneaking through his corridor at 3 in the morning, station time. Ethan was standing in the shadows near a support column. Valeth walked right past him without seeing him. She was headed toward the observation deck on level 47, a large empty room with a curved glass wall that looked out into open space. It was supposed to be off-limits after midnight, but the security systems in that section were old and full of gaps. Ethan knew about those gaps. He had mapped them weeks ago out of habit. He did not stop her. He did not report her. Instead, he followed her at a distance, staying far enough back that she would never know he was there. He watched her step onto the observation deck and stand in front of the glass, staring out at the stars with an expression he recognized immediately. Loneliness. He knew that look. He wore it himself every single day. After that night, Valeth came back again and again. Every few days she would sneak out of the royal quarters, pass through his corridor, and go to the observation deck. She would stand there for an hour or two, sometimes more, just looking at the stars. Sometimes she would sit on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest. Sometimes she would press her hand against the glass as if she were trying to touch something she could never reach. Ethan followed her every time. He never spoke to her. He never let her see him. He simply made sure that no one else was in the area, that the corridors were clear, and that the strange, lonely princess of the most powerful species in the galaxy was safe. He did not think of it as a duty. He did not think of it as anything special. It was just what felt right. She was a kid, alone in the dark, and he was the only one who noticed. The Velenthari Royal Guard had hundreds of soldiers. They had advanced weapons, energy shields, surveillance systems, and combat training that made Earth's best special forces look like children playing with sticks. But not one of them knew that the princess left her quarters at night. Not one of them had bothered to learn her habits, her patterns, her small rebellions. Ethan had. Because a Marine watches, a Marine learns, and a Marine protects even when no one asks him to. The months passed slowly. Ethan continued his meaningless duty in his empty corridor. He continued to be invisible. He continued to follow the princess on her midnight walks. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he did not like to examine too closely, a quiet voice told him that something was coming. Something bad. The station was too comfortable. The security was too relaxed. The gaps were too wide. Ethan had survived 2 wars on Earth. He knew what peace felt like right before it broke. He checked his combat knife. He checked it every night now. And he waited. The alarms came at 2 in the morning. Ethan was in his corridor when the first explosion shook the station. The floor beneath his boots trembled like the skin of a drum. The lights flickered once, twice, and then turned red. Emergency red. The kind of red that meant people were going to die. He pressed his back against the wall and listened. More explosions. Far away, but getting closer. The deep thrum of the station's shields changed pitch, stuttered, and then went silent. That meant the shields were down. That meant whatever was happening outside had already punched through the station's first line of defense. His earpiece crackled with static. The communication channels were jammed. Not broken. Jammed. That was the difference between an accident and an attack. Ethan pulled his combat knife from its sheath and started moving. 3 levels above him in the throne hall, Queen Seraphale felt the explosions through the crystal floor beneath her feet. She stood from her throne and her crystalline skin pulsed with sharp, angry light. Her advisors rushed toward her, their voices overlapping in panic. Reports came in broken pieces. Ships had breached the outer perimeter. Suicide vessels packed with explosives had rammed into the station's shield generators. Boarding parties were inside the station. Armed, organized, deadly. The Shattered Crescent, a separatist faction that had been growing in the outer territories for decades. They wanted to tear the sovereignty apart, and they had chosen tonight to make their move. The Queen's first word was not a command to her military. It was not an order to seal the station. It was a name. Valeth. She turned to the captain of the Royal Guard. "Where is my daughter?" The captain checked his systems. His face changed. The tracking signal from the princess's quarters showed her inside, safe, behind locked doors. But when he opened a direct visual feed, the room was empty. The bed was untouched. The signal was coming from her bracelet, which lay on her pillow like a shed skin. Valith was not in her quarters. She was somewhere on the station, alone and unprotected, and the communication systems were dead. The Queen's crystalline body cracked, not physically, something deeper, something inside her that had held together for 1,000 years splintered in a single moment. She grabbed the captain by the arm and her grip left fractured lines in his armor. Find her now. But the station was enormous. The corridors were dark. The enemy was already inside, and the royal guard did not know where the princess had gone. Ethan knew. He was already running. He took the maintenance shafts because the main corridors were compromised. He could hear gunfire above him and below him. The sharp, high-pitched whine of Velenthari energy weapons mixed with the deeper, uglier sound of projectile guns. The shattered crescent was using crude but effective weapons, the kind designed to punch through crystal armor and shatter Velenthari bodies. Ethan climbed through a ventilation shaft and dropped into a dark hallway on level 47. The observation deck was ahead. He could see the door. It was still sealed, but the lock panel was flickering. Someone had tried to force it open from the outside. He pressed himself against the wall and moved forward. Around the corner, he saw them. 3 figures stood in front of the observation deck door. They were not Velenthari. They were bioforged infiltrators, grown in laboratories, built for killing. Each one stood 7 feet tall with gray, featureless skin and 4 arms ending in blade-like fingers. They had no eyes. They did not need eyes. They hunted by heat and sound and the chemical signature of their target's blood. They had Valith's chemical signature. They had been designed specifically to find her and kill her. One of them had already cut through the door. The metal peeled back like paper. Through the opening, Ethan could see the observation deck, and standing at the far end, pressed against the glass wall with her arms wrapped around herself, was Valith. She was shaking. Her crystalline skin had gone dark, the light inside her dimmed by terror. She looked so small against that vast window of stars. She looked like a child, because she was a child. Ethan did not think. Thinking was for people who had time. He stepped around the corner and into the open. The first infiltrator turned toward him. It was fast, impossibly fast. Its blade arm swung in a wide arc aimed at his throat. Ethan ducked under it and drove his knife into the thing's side, twisting the blade as he pulled it free. Dark fluid sprayed across the wall. The infiltrator screamed, a sound like tearing metal, and swung again. This time the blade caught Ethan across the chest. He felt his skin open. He felt the heat of his own blood. He did not stop. He threw himself between the infiltrators and the door, between the killers and the child. He planted his feet and raised his knife and made himself a wall. The second infiltrator hit him from the left. 2 of its blade arms punched into his side and he felt ribs snap like dry sticks. The pain was enormous. It filled his entire body like boiling water. He grabbed the creature's arm with his free hand and pulled it toward him, using its own momentum to drive his knife into its throat. The blade sank deep. The infiltrator collapsed, pulling Ethan down with it. He hit the floor hard. Blood was pouring from his side and his chest. His left arm was not working right. Something was broken in his shoulder, maybe more than one thing. The third infiltrator stepped over its fallen companion and looked down at Ethan. It raised all 4 blade arms. Ethan rolled, not away from Valith, toward her. He crawled on his hands and knees, leaving a trail of red on the white floor until he reached the princess. She was frozen. Her dark eyes were wide and her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Ethan grabbed her and pulled her down to the floor. He wrapped his body around hers. His back faced the infiltrator. His arms covered her head. His chest pressed against her small, trembling form. He made himself a shield, a human shield, flesh and bone between the blades and the child. The infiltrator's arm came down. Ethan felt it enter his back just below his right shoulder blade. The blade scraped against his spine. The world went white with pain. He clenched his teeth so hard he felt one of them crack, but he did not let go of Valeth. He held her tighter. "Close your eyes," he whispered. His voice was wet. There was blood in his mouth. "Just close your eyes, I got you." The infiltrator pulled its blade free and raised it again. Ethan could feel the shadow of the killing blow above him. He could feel his heartbeat slowing. He could feel the cold creeping in from the edges. Then the corridor exploded with light. The royal guard had arrived, 5 of them in full crystal armor, their energy weapons painting the hallway in white fire. The third infiltrator took 3 direct hits and came apart in a spray of gray matter and broken limbs. The noise was deafening. The light was blinding. And then, suddenly, it was over. Silence. The guards moved forward. They saw the 2 dead infiltrators on the floor. They saw the dark blood. They saw the human. Ethan was lying on top of the princess. His body was broken in more places than he could count. His back was open. His ribs were shattered. One of his lungs had collapsed, and he was breathing in short, wet gasps that sent bubbles of red across the white floor. But Valeth was untouched. Not a single scratch, not a single drop of her blood had been spilled. The guards stopped. They stared. In their entire history, across thousands of years and countless wars, no Velenthari had ever seen anything like this. A being had placed its own body between death and another person. A being had chosen to break itself so that another could remain whole. It was impossible. It was against everything they believed. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing any of them had ever witnessed. One of the guards knelt beside Ethan and carefully, gently lifted him off the princess. Valeth scrambled backward, her skin flickering with wild, uncontrolled light. She looked at Ethan's ruined body. She looked at the blood. Her blood was not there, only his. All of it was his. Ethan's eyes were half closed. His breathing was shallow and wrong. But when the guard moved him, his hand reached out blindly, searching. His fingers found Valeth's arm and he squeezed it once, gently, before his hand fell away and his eyes closed. The guard captain spoke into his communicator. His voice was shaking. In 1,000 years of service, his voice had never shaken before. "We have the princess. She is unharmed. The human. The human needs medical attention. Immediately, he is." The captain paused. He looked at the blood on the floor. He looked at the knife still clutched in Ethan's hand. He looked at the 2 dead bioforged assassins that this small, soft, fragile creature had killed with nothing but a blade and his bare hands. "He is still alive," the captain said quietly. "I do not understand how, but he is still alive." Somewhere above them, Queen Seraphale heard the report and closed her eyes. Her crystalline skin went completely dark, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the immortal queen of the Velenthari sovereignty pressed her hands together and did not know what to feel. Ethan Mercer died twice on the operating table. The first time, his heart stopped for 47 seconds. The Velenthari medical team stared at the monitors, unsure of what to do. Human biology was not their specialty. Human biology was not anyone's specialty on this station. They had studied it the way a university professor might study the life cycle of an insect. Interesting in theory, useless in practice. But the lead surgeon, a tall Velenthari named Dreeneth, refused to let the human go. He called in every medical file the Dominion had on human anatomy and worked through the night, combining Velenthari biotechnology with basic Earth medicine that he downloaded from the station's archives. He regrew tissue. He sealed wounds. He rebuilt 3 of Ethan's ribs using a crystalline compound that would fuse with human bone over time. The second time Ethan's heart stopped, Dreeneth brought him back in 19 seconds. He was getting faster. By the 3rd day, Ethan was stable. By the 5th day, he was breathing on his own. By the 7th day, he opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling of the medical bay, and said one word. "Valeth." Dreeneth told him the princess was safe, unharmed. not a single mark on her body. Ethan closed his eyes again, and something that might have been a smile crossed his broken face. Then he went back to sleep. While Ethan healed in his quiet room, the world outside was on fire. News of what happened on the observation deck had spread through the station within hours. By the next day, it had reached every corner of the Velenthari sovereignty. By the end of the week, the entire galactic dominion was talking about it. A human had shielded the Velenthari princess with his own body. The words were simple, the meaning was not. In the great council chambers of the sovereignty, the highest-ranking advisors, scholars, and religious leaders gathered for an emergency session. They did not gather to discuss the attack. The royal guard had already crushed the shattered Crescent's forces and captured their leaders. The military crisis was over. This was a different kind of crisis, a crisis of belief. The doctrine of the sacred self was the foundation of Velenthari civilization. For thousands of years, every law, every custom, every prayer had been built on one simple truth. The self is sacred. The body is the vessel of the soul. No vessel may be broken for another. This was not just a rule. It was the shape of their reality. It was how they understood what it meant to be alive. And now a human had shattered it. Elder Counselor Thavris, the oldest member of the court, stood before the assembly and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. "What the human did is not possible," he said. "Not in the way we understand the word. A sentient being does not choose to destroy its own vessel for the sake of another vessel. This is not courage. This is not honor. It is a kind of madness that we have no name for." From the other side of the chamber, Scholar Melion rose to challenge him. "It is not madness," she said. "It is something else, something we have refused to consider because it frightens us. The human did not act out of confusion or instinct. He acted with full awareness. He knew what would happen to his body. He chose it anyway. He chose the princess's survival over his own existence. If that is madness, then perhaps our definition of sanity is too small." The argument went back and forth for days. The court split into two camps. The first camp, led by Thavris, believed the human's act should be acknowledged quietly. Give him a reward. Heal his body. Send him back to Earth with a generous payment. Do not make this into something larger than it was. The Velenthari did not need to rewrite their entire philosophy because one alien had a death wish. The second camp, led by Melion, believed something far more radical. They pointed to the ancient texts, the oldest records of Velenthari civilization, written before the doctrine of the sacred self had become law. In those ancient stories, there was a figure called the Ilvathari, the soul shield, a being who gave their body to protect another not out of duty or command, but out of pure, selfless choice. The Ilvathari was considered the highest possible form of existence. So high, in fact, that the Velenthari had decided long ago that it was only a myth. No real being could ever reach that level. No real being would ever want to. But a human had. Melion stood before the court and read from the ancient text. "When the soul shield falls, the one who was shielded shall raise them up. They shall be bound to the crown by blood that is not blood, by bone that is not bone, by a debt that has no name because no word is large enough to hold it." The chamber fell silent. "The human has earned the Ilvathari title," Melion said. "Our own oldest laws demand it. If we deny this, we deny ourselves." Queen Seraphael listened to all of it from her throne. She did not speak. She did not take sides. Her face was unreadable, her crystalline skin cycling through slow, deep colors that none of her advisors could interpret. She was thinking. She was remembering the moment when she heard the report that her daughter was safe, and the moment after that when she heard what the human had done to make it so. She was thinking about what it meant that a creature who lived less than 100 years, who was made of soft tissue and brittle bone, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, had done what no Velenthari in the history of their civilization had ever done. She did not know what to do with that thought. It was too big. It sat inside her like a stone. While the court argued and the queen thought, Valith made her decision. She went to the medical bay on the 9th day. She went alone, without guards, without attendants. The doctors tried to stop her at the door. She looked at them with her mother's eyes, cold and absolute, and they stepped aside. Ethan was awake. He was propped up on the medical bed, staring at the ceiling. His chest was wrapped in white bandages stained with faint spots of red. His face was pale and thin. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together by someone who was not quite sure how all the pieces fit. When Valith entered the room, he turned his head and looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Valith walked to the chair beside his bed and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. Her crystalline skin was dim, almost gray, the way Velenthari skin looked when they were feeling something too large to express. "The court is arguing about you," she said. Ethan blinked. "About me?" "About what you did. Some of them think you are a hero, some think you are insane, some think you are dangerous." She paused. "They do not understand why you did it." Ethan was quiet for a while. His eyes moved to the viewport in the corner of the room where a thin line of stars was visible. "There is nothing to understand," he said. "You were in trouble. I was there. That is the whole story." Valith shook her head slowly. "No, that is not the whole story. My guards were on the station, hundreds of them, trained soldiers with weapons and armor and shields. Not one of them reached me in time. You did. You were not armed. You were not protected. You are smaller and weaker than any of those soldiers. And when you found me, you did not fight from behind cover. You did not try to pull me to safety. You put yourself between me and the blades. You let them cut you open so they could not reach me." Her voice cracked. The sound was like a crystal glass being tapped too hard. "My people believe the body is sacred," she whispered. "We believe it is the most important thing we have. We would never sacrifice it for another. Never. It is our oldest law, our deepest truth." She looked at him with eyes that were too old for her young face. "So I need to ask you, why did you let them break you for me?" Ethan looked at her. This girl who was the daughter of the most powerful being in the galaxy. This girl who had everything and was still lonely enough to sneak out of her room at night just to look at the stars. This girl who was shaking right now, not because she was afraid of him, but because his answer mattered more to her than anything had ever mattered before. He gave her the simplest answer he had. "Because you are a kid," he said, "and I was there. That is all it had to be." Valith stared at him. Her skin flickered. A single point of light appeared in the center of her chest and spread outward through her body like a wave, bright and warm and trembling. It was a Velenthari emotional response so rare that most scholars believed it was extinct. The closest translation in any human language was sacred shame. The feeling of realizing that someone else's heart is bigger than your own. She stood up from the chair. Tears that looked like liquid crystal ran down her face. She did not wipe them away. "Thank you," she said. "I will not forget." She walked out of the medical bay without looking back. The doctors watched her go. They had never seen a member of the royal bloodline cry before. They did not know it was possible. In his bed, Ethan closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. His ribs ached. His back burned. His heart was beating in a strange, uneven rhythm that the doctors kept worrying about. But for the first time in 11 months, he did not feel alone. 3 weeks after the attack, Ethan Mercer received a summons. He was sitting on the edge of his medical bed, trying to put on his boots. It was a slow process. His right arm still did not move the way it used to, and bending forward sent sharp lines of pain through his back where the blade had gone in. The Velenthari doctors had done remarkable work. The crystalline compound they used to rebuild his ribs had bonded with his bones in ways that human medicine could not have achieved in 100 years. But healing was not the same as being healed. His body remembered what had been done to it. Every morning it reminded him. The summons came on a small crystal tablet delivered by a Velenthari officer Ethan had never seen before. The officer was tall, like all of them, and wore ceremonial armor that gleamed with internal light. He did not look at Ethan with the usual dismissal. He looked at him with something else, something careful and uncertain, like a man looking at a fire he did not understand. "You are requested in the throne hall," the officer said. "Immediately." Ethan stared at him. "The throne hall?" "Yes." "No human has ever been inside the throne hall." The officer paused, his crystalline jaw tightened. "That is correct." Ethan finished putting on his boots. It took him a long time. The officer waited without complaint. The walk to the throne hall took 20 minutes. Ethan moved slowly, his body stiff and aching, through corridors that became wider and more beautiful with every step. The walls changed from plain metal to polished crystal. The ceiling rose higher. The light grew softer and warmer. The air itself seemed to carry a faint hum, like a song playing just below the range of hearing. They passed through a set of doors that were 3 stories tall and carved with symbols so old that even most Velenthari could not read them. Beyond the doors was the throne hall. Ethan stopped. The hall was enormous. It stretched so far in every direction that the walls seemed to curve with the shape of the station itself. The floor was made of a single piece of transparent crystal, and through it, Ethan could see the stars below his feet. It was like standing on nothing, like standing on the universe itself. Hundreds of Velenthari filled the hall. Advisors, military commanders, scholars, religious leaders. They stood in ordered rows, their crystalline bodies catching the light and sending it bouncing across the room in patterns that shifted with every small movement. Along the upper galleries, Ethan could see the observation windows where ambassadors from other species watched. He recognized the shapes of Dralith, Kenver, Thessani, and at least a dozen others. This was not a private meeting. This was a public event. It was being watched. At the far end of the hall, raised on a platform of white crystal, sat the throne, and on the throne sat Queen Seraphael. She was the tallest Velenthari Ethan had ever seen. Her skin was deep violet, shot through with veins of gold light that pulsed in slow, steady rhythms. Her eyes were completely white, with no pupils, and they burned with a cold, ancient intelligence. She wore no crown. She did not need one. Everything about her said queen in a language that did not require words. Beside the throne, standing on a slightly lower platform, was Valeth. The princess wore formal robes of deep blue crystal weave. Her skin had regained its pale blue shimmer. She stood very straight with her hands folded in front of her, and when Ethan entered the hall, her eyes found him immediately. She did not smile. She did not wave, but something in her expression shifted. A small, private change that only someone who had spent months watching her in the dark would notice. Ethan walked forward. Every step echoed in the silence. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. He was a human. He was small. He was scarred. He was wearing a borrowed uniform that did not fit properly because Velenthari clothes were not made for human bodies. He stopped at the base of the platform and stood as straight as his damaged spine would allow. The queen looked down at him. For a long time she said nothing. The silence in the hall was so complete that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. Then Valeth moved. She stepped forward, past her mother's throne, down the crystal steps, and onto the main floor of the hall. This was a breach of protocol so severe that several advisors visibly flinched. The princess did not stand on the common floor during formal proceedings. The princess stayed beside the throne, always. But Valeth was not interested in protocol. She walked until she stood directly in front of Ethan, close enough that he could see the light moving inside her skin. She was taller than him. She looked down at his scarred, battered face, and he looked up at hers. Then she turned to face the court and spoke. Her voice was not loud. She did not shout, but every word carried through the hall with a clarity that made even the ambassadors in the upper galleries lean forward. I stand before this court not as the princess of the sovereignty. I stand as a life that was saved, a vessel that was preserved. The being standing behind me gave what no Velanthari has ever given. He offered his vessel for mine. He did not hesitate. He did not calculate the cost. He placed his body between me and death, and he let death take from him what it wanted so that it could not take from me. She paused. The court was frozen. Not a single body moved. Our oldest texts speak of the Elvathari, the soul shield. We have treated this as legend, as myth, as something too pure, too selfless, too impossible to exist in the real world. We built our entire civilization on the belief that such sacrifice was beyond the reach of any living being. Her voice hardened. We were wrong. A murmur ran through the court. Valith silenced it by raising one hand. I do not ask the court's permission. I do not request a vote. I do not seek a compromise. I invoke the Elvathari right, as written in the covenant of the first light, the oldest law of our people. I demand that Ethan Mercer be named my sworn shield, bonded to the crown by blood debt, granted the rank and protections of the royal bloodline itself. The murmur became a roar. Voices rose from every corner of the hall. Elder Thavra stepped forward, his face twisted with outrage. This is madness. The Elvathari rite has never been performed. It was never meant to be performed. And certainly not for a human, a creature that lives barely a century, a species that cannot even. Cannot even what? Valith turned on him with a sharpness that stopped his words cold. Cannot even do what we have always said was impossible. Cannot sacrifice themselves for another, because he did. He did it, Elder. He did it while your guards were still running through corridors trying to find me. He did it with a knife in his bare hands. He did it with a body that you call weak and fragile and worthless. She looked around the hall, meeting every pair of white eyes she could find. He will stand beside me, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me, for as long as he lives. This is the debt. This is the law. This is what our oldest words demand. The hall held its breath. Queen Seraphale had not moved. She had watched her daughter speak with an expression that shifted slowly, like clouds moving across a deep sky. Pride, fear, wonder, grief, something that might have been love in the strange and distant way that Velanthari queens loved. The queen rose from her throne. The hall went absolutely silent. The queen had not stood from the crystal throne for a foreign being in over 1,000 years. The last time it happened was during the signing of the Galactic Compact, when the first races joined the Dominion. It was not a casual gesture. It was the highest acknowledgement the sovereignty could offer. Seraphale descended the steps. Her movements were slow and deliberate. Each footstep rang on the crystal floor like a bell. She stopped in front of Ethan. She was nearly 3 feet taller than him. She looked down at this small, broken man who had given everything he had for her daughter, and for the first time in the memory of any living Velanthari, the queen bowed her head. The right is invoked, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled every corner of the hall. The crown acknowledges the debt. The covenant of the first light is honored. She reached out one long, crystalline hand and placed it on Ethan's shoulder. Where she touched him, his skin warmed. The crystalline compound in his rebuilt ribs hummed in response, resonating with her energy like a tuning fork. Rise, Elvathari, the queen said. You are of the crown now. Ethan looked up at her. He did not know what to say. He was a sergeant from Earth. He had joined the Marines because he had no money for college. He had been sent to this station because nobody cared where he went. He was nobody. He was nothing. But he had been there, and he had stepped forward, and now the most powerful civilization in the galaxy was calling him sacred. Behind him, visible through the transparent floor, the stars burned on. Above him, in the observation galleries, ambassadors from dozens of species sent messages back to their governments. The messages all said the same thing in different languages, across different channels to different worlds. The humans watch the humans. They are more than we thought. 5 years changed everything. Ethan Mercer stood on the command balcony of the Throne of Stars and watched a fleet of human ships drop out of faster-than-light travel. They appeared in the darkness like sparks from a struck match, 12 vessels in a tight formation, their hulls painted with the silver shield emblem of the Terran Aegis Corps. They were not the biggest ships in the sector. They were not the most powerful. But every species within 1,000 light-years knew what that emblem meant, and most of them had learned to pay attention when it appeared. 5 years ago, humanity had been nothing, a footnote in the Dominion's records, a minor species given minor tasks and minor respect, translators, laborers, furniture with heartbeats. That was before the observation deck, before the blood on the white floor, before a Marine with a combat knife did what an entire civilization believed was impossible. The Mercer effect, that was what the diplomats called it. Ethan hated the name, but he could not argue with the results. After the ceremony in the throne hall, after the broadcasts reached every corner of the Dominion, the galaxy had started asking a question it had never thought to ask before. What else can humans do? The answer, it turned out, was quite a lot. Within a year of Ethan's elevation to Elvathari, 6 other species had requested human security personnel, not because humans were the strongest fighters. They were not. Not because humans had the best technology. They did not. They wanted humans because humans had something that no other species in the Dominion could offer, something that could not be built in a laboratory or programmed into a machine. Humans would put themselves in front of danger for someone else. They would do it without being ordered. They would do it without expecting anything in return. They would do it for strangers. They would do it for children they had never met. They would do it knowing that it would cost them everything. This terrified the galaxy, and the galaxy wanted that terror on its side. Earth's government, stunned by the sudden shift in their interstellar status, had formed the Terran Aegis Corps. It was a volunteer force, made up of men and women who had chosen to serve as protectors, mediators, and crisis responders across the Dominion. They were trained in alien languages, customs, and combat techniques. They carried weapons, but their most important tool was the same thing that had always set humanity apart: the willingness to break. Ethan had not asked for any of this. He had not given speeches or written policies or led parades. He had simply continued doing what he had always done. He stood beside Valeth. He watched. He protected. The princess had grown in 5 years. She was taller now, nearly matching her mother's height. Her pale blue shimmer had deepened into a rich sapphire, and her voice had developed the same quiet authority that made Queen Seraphale so formidable. She was being trained to rule. Advisors, scholars, and military commanders filled her days with lessons and briefings and strategy sessions that would have crushed a lesser mind. But every evening, when the formal duties ended and the court emptied, Valeth would find Ethan. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence on the observation deck, the same one where everything had changed, and watched the stars move past the glass. She never called him by his title. She never called him Elvathari or Sworn Shield or any of the other names the court had given him. She called him Ethan, and he called her kid. Even now, even though she was no longer a child, even though she was taller than him and stronger than him, and would one day command an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy, she was still the kid from the observation deck. She would always be the kid from the observation deck. Their relationship confused the Valenthari. It did not fit into any of their categories. It was not romantic. It was not familial in the Valenthari sense. It was not a formal bond of service, even though the Elvathari rite defined it that way on paper. It was something else, something the Valenthari did not have a word for. Humans had a word for it. Several, actually: guardian, protector, father figure. The closest match depended on who you asked and how sentimental they were feeling. Ethan never tried to define it. Definitions were for people who needed to put things in boxes. Some things did not fit in boxes. Some things just were. Today was a significant day. The Terran Aegis Corps was arriving for its first official deployment at the Throne of Stars. 12 ships, 300 human volunteers. They would serve alongside the Velenthari Royal Guard as a joint security force, the first of its kind in Dominion history. Ethan watched the ships approach and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Quiet, careful hope, the kind that a man carries in his chest like a candle flame, shielding it with his hands because the wind might blow it out at any moment. He heard footsteps behind him, light footsteps but not silent. Valeth had learned long ago that sneaking up on Ethan was not possible. His ears were too sharp, and his instincts were too old to be fooled. She stepped onto the balcony and stood beside him, not behind him, not in front of him, beside him, the way she had demanded in the throne hall 5 years ago. They watched the fleet together in silence. 300 of them, Valeth said after a while, all volunteers. Yes. They know the risks. They know that serving here means placing themselves between danger and the people they protect. That is the job. Valeth turned to look at him. Her sapphire skin reflected the light of the approaching ships. Your people confuse me, Ethan. You are so fragile, you break so easily. I have seen the medical reports on your species. Your bones crack under pressures that our children could withstand. Your skin tears. Your organs fail. You age and weaken and die in what feels to us like the blink of an eye. She shook her head slowly. And yet you throw yourselves in front of danger as though your bodies mean nothing. Ethan watched the ships. The lead vessel was rotating slowly as it approached the docking bay, and the light from the station caught its hull and turned it gold. That is the part you have got backwards, he said. What do you mean? He turned to look at her. His face was older now. The scars from the observation deck had faded but never disappeared. Thin white lines crossed his jaw and neck. His right shoulder sat slightly lower than his left, a permanent reminder of the blade that had entered his back. He was 43 years old. By Velenthari standards, he was already past middle age. By human standards, he was just getting started. Our bodies mean everything, he said. That is the whole point. We know how fragile we are. We know exactly what it costs. Every human who steps in front of a blade or a bullet or a falling beam knows that their body is the only one they will ever have. We are not careless with it. We are not indifferent to pain. We feel every single thing that happens to us, and we are afraid every single time. He looked back at the ships. But we do it anyway, because the person behind us matters more than the fear. That is what makes it mean something. If it did not cost us anything, it would not be sacrifice. It would just be convenience. Valeth was quiet for a long time. The ships docked, one by one, and the sound of human voices began to filter through the station's communication channels. Laughter, greetings, the ordinary sounds of ordinary people arriving at an extraordinary place. When I was young, Valeth said slowly, I used to sneak out of my quarters at night and go to the observation deck. I never told anyone. I thought it was my secret. Ethan said nothing. But it was never a secret, was it? She looked at him. You were always there in the corridor, in the shadows, watching. Yes. Even before the attack, even when I was nothing to you, even when nobody told you to. You were never nothing. Valeth's skin brightened. That deep, warm glow that spread from her chest outward, the one the scholars said was extinct, the one that had no name in modern Velenthari language. It happened rarely now, only in these moments on this balcony with this particular human. She looked out at the stars and said something that would be recorded by the listening systems and broadcast across the Dominion within hours. Something that scholars and philosophers and leaders of 100 species would debate and discuss and carry with them for generations. The galaxy feared the species that builds weapons, Valeth said. It should have feared the species that builds walls out of themselves. Ethan smiled. It was a tired smile, worn around the edges, carrying the weight of old pain and new purpose. He stood on the balcony of an alien station, a million light years from the planet where he was born, wearing scars that told a story most species could not believe. He was human. That was all he had ever been. That was all he had ever needed to be. Below them, through the transparent floor, the stars burned with patient light. Above them, in the docking bay, 300 men and women stepped off their ships and into history. They carried weapons. They carried training. They carried the flag of a species that the galaxy had once considered insignificant. But most importantly, they carried something else. The same thing Ethan had carried into the dark corridor on the night everything changed. The same thing he had placed between the blades and the child. The same thing that had broken a civilization's oldest belief and rewritten the rules of what a living being could be. Not strength, not technology, not strategy or intelligence or ambition. Just the simple, terrifying, impossible willingness to say, "You matter more than I do," and to mean it with every fragile, breakable, irreplaceable cell of their bodies. The galaxy had learned many things about humanity in the last 5 years. It had learned about their music and their wars and their poetry and their science. It had learned about their short lives and their stubborn spirits and their strange, reckless love for beings they had never met. But the lesson that mattered most, the one that changed everything, was this: humans do not protect others because they are strong enough to survive it. They protect others because the person behind them is worth not surviving for. And there is no force in the universe more powerful than that.